Let's begin our session today, wherein we're going to understand how we should be getting started with Flutter state management techniques, guys. Now, when it comes to state management, we're going to have different kind of approaches, starting with what exactly goes in state management. I'm going to cover all of them into much more details in today's session. So let us start with this topic for state management, and time and over, I'm going to switch back to the whiteboard and explain you what things we are going to take into consideration. Talking about the agenda, I'm keeping it fairly simple. I'm going to make you understand what state management are the apps applying to, or what different state management techniques that exist into Flutter, what are the best coding practices, the libraries that allow you to do state management, and what, how, and which structure you should be following for your clean architecture. Lastly, after all these things, I'm going to show to you which are the best resources which you can learn, via with which you can learn about state management. Okay, I'm going to begin with point number one. What is the state management? Well, when it comes to Flutter, the UI is divided into widgets. What do I mean by that? Let's imagine that you created an app, and that app is trying to load information from a server. Now, look at this website even. When I try to hit the URL, it has a bit amount of loading. Now, as the loading is being complete, it shows me this pop-up. I can click on it and then start using the website. Now, over here, I can do pen strokes like this, and then basically I'm using the website now. Well, what exactly is now state management? Let's understand this from a very simple example. Like, you open Amazon, be it an e-commerce website, there is initially a loading. What is loading? It will try to get the information from the server. Then over here, it is a data display, wherein the data which you were trying to load from a remote server got successfully loaded, and finally it is error. Now the error is probably that you might have a low internet, or let's say there is absolutely like your server is down, or your server is not reachable. All of these errors which are going to consider is going to be under the error state. Well, that exactly is meant by state management. Now, over here, let's share, or let's understand why did I say that the UI is typically divided into widgets. Like, let's consider one more scenario wherein if there is this loading of the data, you would notice there is a small animation it plays, and then the pop-up shows up. So what we are trying to do, or what the developer for this website has done, it has tried to get the information from the server, and meanwhile you just cannot show a blank screen to the user. Hence you display a loading symbol. At that point in time, you have a clear understanding that the loading is in progress, and you have to wait until the loading or the data is received from the server. That exactly is meant by coupling it with the widgets. Secondly, when we are talking about the second part of the sentence, it revolves around how data is shared. Let's imagine that once you load this data, let me just explain you with the help of a diagram, and I would be using draw.io. So let's say you have your Android app. Now, We are going to understand how data is shared. So let's say over here you have a list of products. So let's say this is a mobile phone, a laptop, over here is computer accessories, next, so on and so forth. Okay, if at all you click on a laptop, then a new page will open and that will show the description of the laptop, what is going to be the cost associated with it, followed by the description of it, all of those details. So what you're trying to see is the data that you are doing an action upon on the home screen is being visible on the next screen where you're trying to see the product description. It basically means you're trying to have a relation in between these two things, wherein had you been selected mobile, then over here the mobile images would have shown up along with the cost of the phone. Okay, so that's basically how each and every app would be working in a better way, and that exactly the Flutter concept is state management. When it comes to good state management, it ensures that if there is a small change in the app occurring, you are not updating the entire app. Well, what do I mean by that? So let's say when you're trying to have an app revolving around stock market, wherein the prices for the commodities and the stocks they change in a fraction of a second. So imagine over here is a stock which is ABC Corporation and it is currently trading as 1330 rupees, and over here it changes to, let's say, this much. So if this had been the listing one below the another, then what would have done is, to understand that only this component has changed, we would have to look onto the entire widget tree and then refresh it. With the help of state management, we can just ignore all of this and refresh just one particular card to display the updates. Hence, had it been a scenario that you would have been updating the entire screen, that is from top to bottom, this from the topmost pixel, if you would have been editing the things till the bottommost pixel, then things would have been very CPU intensive. Let me just take the questions if you have any. Okay, so Mr. Mayank, you can surely start your coding by reading blogs. And if you have, let's say, like an information and you want to have basic idea and you want to move ahead into your career into coding, then you can surely take up a course which you can learn in over a stipulated time and then practice coding. So that's how you can go about in your college coding journey. Now, over here, let's understand the next part, wherein we're going to talk about what are providers and how you should be handling or what you should be doing in case of state management. So, if you would see where exactly is the state management is required, and here I have given you all the things that you should be doing in order to have a good state management approach defined. Let's see where it would be required when you're handling user inputs. What kind of user inputs? Now imagine that if you would be using any kind of a, let's say, if you would be using any kind of an app, it would surely have a registration page wherein you're asked to enter information about your name, your email address, so on and so forth. So let me just take this thing out and plug it over here. Yeah. So what we're going to do is we'll take an example for three fields: name, your email ID, and the phone number. Now, name, email ID, and phone number are the three things that you would be taking or some app is taking. So let's say while entering the name, someone has added like 123 by mistake. So you're not going to allow this and you're going to show an error. Like if you have to go ahead in the app, you have to fix and you have to give a proper name. And then let's say while typing an email ID, it misses out on this gmail.com or this domain. Okay, so then you can show up an error. Or in the phone number, someone has put absurd characters, then you can show up an error. So all of this are error states, correct? So that's exactly where your Flutter state management will help you understand if the information is correct, and you can successfully show him the home screen, or the information is incorrect and you have to show an error and make the user correct the information. So all of these techniques are part of your providers, or you can say your state management techniques. Now, the other benefits include that it helps you separate out the business logic from the UI. So what is separating out the business logic and UI? Now, when it comes to Flutter, it's a good practice that you should be following MVVM. We're going to see what is MVVM shortly, but let me explain you in a gist that M, it stands for model, then comes V, which stands for the view, and then comes view model, which is going to help you in establishing the relation between your screens and between your UI, that is the actual design. Now, if you would notice, these three are three separate layers of your app, and you should not be dumping your code right into one single file and then make your entire app to work. That's just a terrible practice, guys. So what you should be instead doing is having your code segregated, and in case of something goes wrong, you can exactly understand this is the root cause and you try to figure out a solution for it. Now, let me again check with the comment box if anyone has got any other questions to ask to me. Yeah. Now, let's see what are the other different benefits that you have got. The third one is maintaining the application state. Now, imagine that if you're trying to create an app in which you're trying to have cameras, okay, and when you are, let's say, shooting an image, so this is, let's say, your shutter icon. Now, when you're trying to click an image, you get a phone call. Okay, so what will happen? This camera app, which you're working upon, it's going to go into the background, and this phone app over which you got a phone call, it's going to come in the foreground. Then, let's say Once your conversation over the phone call is complete, you go back to the camera app. So imagine a scenario wherein all this time when you are talking on the phone call, the camera was on. Would that be a good kind of an app? Obviously not. What you would be rather be expecting is, in order to save the battery, your camera should be shut off when you're talking on the phone. And then once you're moving back from here back to the original app, like over here, when you're trying to go back to the camera, this is invoked again. That's exactly where you would be having a good architecture. That is where you guys should be implementing a state management. So as you will now see, it offers solution for data sharing, which you're going to talk in another few minutes again, and performance optimization. Now, in order to do all of this, what we can do is we will be learning about Flutter, and you guys can get a good resource by going on to this Udemy course for Flutter, wherein over here this Flutter course, whose link is in the description box below, you can see that all the topics that you probably would be requiring for your apps for getting you started with Flutter, I have covered it into this entire course. You can check out this link, see what others are talking about it, and then get yourself enrolled. And then you will be earning a certificate which will help you finding an employment. Next is, what is state management in apps? When it comes to Flutter, the UI is typically divided into widgets, and state management revolves around how data is shared between these widgets. So, like I was saying, when we were onto this app, wherein you had this list of products and you were trying to get the data from your server. So you are exchanging the same information on next screen. That is, if this is the product listing screen, then over here is the product description screen, and the product description screen is actually dependent upon what you're selecting on the product listing screen. So in this way, what you can be doing is you can be ensuring that your data is revolving around different kind of widget and you have absolutely control over it. Now, when it comes to good state management, it also ensures that if a small part of the app changes, then you're making those changes into your UI. Let's go to the second question into our agenda. Where and what are the different techniques you can use for state management? The number one is built-in technique. So what is built-in technique? Now, have you tried your hands on Flutter? Then you would have surely come across two kind of widgets. One whose name is stateless widget, and others are stateful widget. Now, the combination of stateless and stateful widget help us to create an entire app, because an app is going to have some dynamic screens, or the screens which are going to change, and some static screens which are going to be like, or static components like buttons, text, or let's say the icons in the app, so they would barely change. That's exactly where you're going to have stateless and stateful widgets. So stateful widgets are where you want to have the dynamic things, and stateless widgets are where you want to have the static things. Now, let's talk about what are the other different techniques which are there. Now, before I move out, yeah, so I'm going to share my screen again. Next is, let's say, providers. So what is providers? Yet another state management approach, followed by block, river pod, and getx. Now, I'm not going to just do the talking. In fact, I have got simple examples from each topic. Now, let's imagine this scenario. So what do we have? There is a text on which the counter has been there. When you click on this button, that is increment button, then the counter increases by 1. Very simple code. Where is it increasing? Check this set state. It is increasing. Now, over here, rather than you trying to implement a library, you take a very straightforward approach. What you do, you write down a stateful widget, you write down the build function, and whenever you're clicking on the button, you do set state. But as the approach is very straightforward, it implies that it has CPU intensiveness. Now, let's imagine when you are trying to refresh the app from the topmost to the bottommost pixel. So here, uh, let me even pick my phone and try to arrange this. Yeah. So just imagine that you have here your topmost pixel, and over here is your bottommost pixel. Okay, so had you been keeping on changing this, okay, then what is the problem? It's CPU intensive. And that is what is the very basic challenge that you would see, that if you everything create along with stateless and stateful widget in Flutter, you're going to surely face your app sluggishness. So, see, next technique is where you can make it much more simplified. As you would notice, there is this block builder. In the previous case, there is nothing as a builder. So what would happen? The build function is going to re-trigger again and again. Why? That's because you're doing set state. So what is the build function? The things that you see on the screen. So what you have is a simple text and a button. Now, the same code is well optimized here, as because when you're clicking on the button, this time you are not going to do any kind of a stateful widget implementation. It's a stateless widget. So how does it communicate, or how does it increment and show the value? Is because now when you're trying to add this increment, then only the builder gets recomposed. That's equal to, if this is the technique in which you have your entire built-in functions, then only this much part of the screen would change. What do I mean by that? Only one particular aspect, let's say this text, which is going to show the incremented count, is going to change. So check over here, I've highlighted it, this entire thing in red color, to indicate that what is the rate of refreshing the screen. That's from the topmost to the bottommost pixel. On the other hand, when you're trying to follow with the help of block architecture, this is a small piece of screen which is getting updated. That is the benefit, guys. You're not trying to do hell lot of things into your app and doing only the required things. Now, let's go to the next technique, which is kind of derived from, or block is derived from providers only. So over here, if you would notice, there is a separate class. Now, had you been into this live session from the very beginning, at the beginning only, I showed you this particular slide wherein I was talking about separating the UI logic. Now, if you would notice, in this particular code, I have my counter as a separate class. In this particular logic, I have my counter as a separate class, and over here, not a separate class. So imagine a scenario that you have multiple things into your hand. What do I mean is, one, you have to do a science assignment. So there is your teacher who gave you a science assignment. Now, on the exact next day, there is your teacher that gives you a math assignment. Now, over here, what we are trying to do is we will keep separate notebooks for all of this subject. So what we are trying to do, we are trying to keep the information segregated amongst different books. And that exactly is what we are doing here. We are trying to separate out this UI layer, which is this column with the button, and with separating it out, we are having this counter as a separate class in which we are doing notify listeners. Now, this notify listeners is going to change only this widget and then update the value on the text. What do you understand is, had it been a scenario that you would have multiple screens into your app. So let's say you had home screen, then you would be having before the home screen, let's say a registration screen, and from the home screen, you can go to, let's say, product information screen. So all of this is all different screens. And if you do notify listeners, then only this part of the code changes. Let's say if you do notify listeners on home screen, only this part changes and the others remain intact. That is what is the beauty for provider architecture. Now, when it comes to block architecture, it already has the provider and then you try to optimize it. So this is one of the core strengths that I have covered into my Flutter course, wherein if you would see, everything into the Flutter is being designed along with block. So you'll see there is a SQLite database on which you're going to understand block. Then there would be navigation techniques and data handling and the capstone project everywhere where you should be finding the block coding to be there. Yeah, let's go on to the presentation wherein we are going to have the next technique, which is river pod. Now, these are just the names of writing your Flutter code for state management. Well, why am I showing you all of this? Is not to confuse you, but in order to add on top of your knowledge that if you kind of not understand block architecture, you can readily shift to Riverpod. What is Riverpod? It is yet another state management approach. It helps you to give a stateful a powerful approach to managing the states, and then you can be like storing the information and retrieving the information anywhere with the help of Riverpod. So here's the entire checklist that you should be doing. First, you should be having a right state management approach. Then you should be using the code generation. So what is code generation? So now I'm going to show you a plugin. Like, if you would have been following my live sessions, I always love this Flutter ESR plugin. So you would notice when you go into the documentation of this, it helps you to create an entire app, and when you're trying to run these commands, you will be getting your code auto generated. Now I'm not talking about chat gpt kind of a thing. This is the code that will be helping you to achieve an offline functionality into your app. You are going to run a command, you're going to type this and run a command, and the table will get created. Then you can perform write and read operations, and then you can perform all kind of stream operations into your entire database. So this all is possible when it comes to the Flutter state management approach. Now, the next thing is how you can organize your code for clarity, how you should be having your different classes segregated so you're not preparing a jumbled up code, and you're creating data structures which are immutable. So let's understand what is a clean architecture. Now, when it comes to normal any kind of an app, you would be noticing that it would be having like 3 to 5 developers that would be working on the project. So let's imagine that there are two persons who are handling the onboarding. So what is onboarding? Let's say over here there is login, there is registration, there is forget password, so on and so forth. Then here comes the second guy, one person who does the entire code for the home screen, and then there is this another one person who does the, let's say, the product information screen and the payment gateway screen. So what I'm trying to do is, you guys have segregated your work amongst different persons. So it's very important that you guys are doing teamwork and not haphazardly doing coding, which nobody would be following along. That kind of a thing is helpful by you following clean architecture, wherein in this dynamic world of mobile app, you are going to create a strong and an easy to maintain app, which allows you to add more and more features over time. And Flutter is known for this UI friendly toolkit, wherein you can actually add a clean architecture. And I'm going to show to you what are the different layers on which you can be working upon. As Flutter project can get more intricate, this clean architecture can help you for maintaining your app success and finding issues if you have your users getting their apps crashed on their device. And that would be terrible if you're unable to give a resolution to those users, as it might hamper your company's business. Now, if you would notice, when it comes to the clean architecture, your code is written into 4 different layers. I'm going to start with bottom to top, wherein at the very bottom you create the UI, your screens, buttons, icons, images, all of the things that you're visually seeing into the app gets onto the data layer and the UI layer. Above that is the repository. Repository means how will you go and what is the expected data that you're going to receive from the server, which defines the use cases. Use cases is like I give you an example, whether you're trying to onboard the user or you're doing the home screen or you're doing the payment gateway. It helps you in writing the use cases and the entities help you in exchanging of this information. Following this, you can get guaranteed results, and that exactly is being very much communicated into my Flutter course, wherein I have tried to segregate the entire code into different folders and make you understand what is exactly going to be the code into different things. Next, in the clean architecture is this part wherein I have been advocating block. So block is even a Google recommended architecture, which kind of is very simple according to me to understand. So if you would see, at the middle is the domain layer, wherein you are going to communicate along with the left side presentation and the right side data layer. So, what is data source? Let's say when it comes to your app, you have an app that is offline, like WhatsApp, in which even if the app does not have an internet connection, no, you can still read through the data. Next, through the repository, you are creating a use case and then giving it to the UI. In same way, you're not dumping a code at one single place and then having different segregated layers. So this kind of segregation of models and widgets will help you writing a code that everyone would be understanding in the company. Now, coming to where to learn. So in this case, in my entire course, what I have done is segregated into small modules. All this course has been available for over slightly over 17 hours, as because I have also included a capstone project in which I have taught about how you can create graph, how you can get GPS location and live location of the device, etc. in a very beautiful way. Let me take the questions. Yeah.